All right. This week, we get into World War II. You all have taken the Unit 3 test, and we're going to start Unit 4 with World War II. And hopefully you can see the rise of these dictators into power and how that led to World War II. And hopefully we've also talked about some of the other circumstances surrounding World War II and how we're going to get to there. So starting into chapter 28 this week, we're talking about World War II and really where things come to a head. A couple of things that I want you to pay close attention to this week in the reading. The supplementary reading is going to be a little different, and it's going to be Russia between the wars, which I think is important to understand life and really the social aspect in between these wars. And I want you to take into account some of those things as we move through, and then the final that we're coming up on next is going to give you some of those ideas. You're going to be able to take some of those ideas of society and what's going on and be able to incorporate them into some of those responses. And so I hope that with that you can kind of see what's going on. We'll talk a little bit about that today as well. Really, I think that there is this thing that we need to talk about that we don't normally talk about in Western Civ, which is the United States. Partly because this isn't a U.S. history course, but partly because we're trying to keep that focus on Europe. And so one of the things that I want to make sure that we're getting to this week, though, is this idea of isolationism and the United States. The United States, coming out of World War I, is one of the most wealthiest, one of the strongest nations, and their decision or our decision to disarm and withdraw from the global stage really causes a major issue. Okay, the idea of isolation, although I think a lot of us think today, if we would just get off of the global stage and worry about ourselves, that it wouldn't be such a problem, except we play such a large, important role within our global society that we can't necessarily do that. And World War II is the perfect way to be able to see some of the ways that goes wrong, okay? By withdrawing from the global stage and isolating ourselves, what we end up doing is we allow those dictators to be able to run amok, if you will. There's nobody to hold them in check, and there's no restraint for angry or ambitious dictators. And without anybody standing there saying, hey, you better not do that, and we have arms to put you in your place if you don't. I personally am not one who is for spending the amount of money that the U.S. does on our defense. However, this proves that there's a reason that we spend that kind of money on defense. We need to be able to stay at the top and show some sign of force so that we can do that and keep people in check. Otherwise, that doesn't happen. Now, we've just talked about imperialism. I think that there is a balance, and we've got to find that balance. And that's, as your history professor, that's one thing that I think is that we need to find moderation, and we should be trying to find that. However, with this, the U.S. doesn't do that. They pull out of globalization and decide that they're going to be isolated. They're going to live in isolation. So that causes some problems. You also have Britain and France, who also refuse to take threats seriously until it's too late, and World War II is inevitable at that point. And so it makes it difficult, I think, at times that we see the U.S., Britain, and France all pulling back. As we've seen, World War I was difficult, and we have a lot of people who are just saying, you know what, we should take care of our own. And they go back to their own countries, and they're trying not to worry about what's going on out there, even though it is kind of terrible. Okay, I want you to see this week according to some historians, if the democracies had remained strong and had remained responsible, had remained realistic, they could have fixed perceived injustices and mistakes. Okay, and really, I guess that's what I'm getting at with this idea of the U.S. Going into isolation, Britain and France deciding to do what they need to do, and not really looking at some of these dictators because they're worrying about themselves. And so because of that, they're not responsible. They kind of take a step back, and this allows these dictators to really take control over places that they shouldn't have, and that gets them into trouble. Okay, so let's get into World War II. You're going to be able to read about it. This is something that we all should be caught up on and understand the intricacies. Not maybe the intricacies, but understand at least the very basis of World War II and what happens. You'll get some of that out of the reading. What I want to really focus on is how we lead up to World War II. Okay. First, you have the Japanese occupation of Manchuria in 1931. I had a friend in grad school who was working on this as well. I think he would be grateful that I use this as a starting point of World War II. Okay, some historians don't believe that the occupation of Manchuria has anything to do with World War II, but I think what it shows is that Japan had the power and is exerting it. Okay, they're exerting that power into Manchuria and they're taking over. Italy's attack on Ethiopia is another one. I'll leave it. It's 1935, and I'll leave this to the end. Japanese occupation, Italy's attack on Ethiopia. You have the German, Italian, and Soviet intervention in the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939. And lastly, Japan's attack on China in 1937. All of these really is what it's showing you is that they're ambitious leaders who want to show their military might. They want to show how strong they are. They want to show that they're in control and that they can do what they want. And with those bullet points, I hope that you can see that that's how we're going to lead into World War II with everybody, with the leaders who do moving that direction. Okay. With this, I hope that you also see a global war is coming on. Okay. What's interesting, I think, about this and what you should take note of is that it is a global war, except you've got three global powers that are not doing anything about it. Britain, France, and the United States are kind of letting things go, trying to take care of their own, and that's going to lead to problems because they don't step up and take control of some of these lesser powers. And lesser powers is probably relative, but really this idea that they're off the stage, and so you've got these other powers doing what they want and showing their might. Okay. We get into World War II. There are a lot of different battles and things. If that's what you're interested in, please spend time reading this week on the different battles and the intricacies of World War II. If that's not what you're interested in, skim those pieces of this chapter. What I'm really looking for is really the broader implication of World War II. If I wanted you to understand every single piece of World War II, the wars, Pearl Harbor, different D-Day. I mean, if the Battle of the Bulge, if you wanted to see some of those things, that would be a course that we would have on World War II, and we would talk about those different concepts. This is a survey course, and so we're trying to reach as much as we possibly can over the course of the 16 weeks. And so really, I think what the next big thing would be after that is the atomic bomb. The United States, although several different countries are working on them, the United States is the one that gets to it the quickest, and they're able to drop two bombs, which is devastating to Japan at the time. Now, I just ran over this with my U.S. history course just 2 weeks ago, and one of the things that I asked that course is this what it was going to take? And I don't have a question for you other than for you to pose to yourself. Is it the atomic bomb? Is that what was going to end the war? Is that what it would take to end the war? Was it the atomic bomb, or was there another way? Okay. It's difficult, I think, as a historian to choose either one. What we have is what happened, and we can see that did stop it. In fact, that's kept Japan from really arming themselves and having a military since that time. However, I'm not certain that we as a country have come to grips with what that did to Japan, and maybe how devastating that was. So just food for thought, and not something that we need to debate. I just want you to be able to look at it. One of the students in my U.S. history course brought up that there really was no way that the Japanese, due to their code of honor, that they would have stopped, and that is partly true. That's probably true. So I know historians really debate this topic, and I just want to make sure that as you read through, look for that, because that is definitely a something in society that I want you to see that makes us all different, and it's difficult to see who would have won doing what. I think that a lot of times we think, well, that was a terrible thing, and maybe we had to do that. Similarly to Japanese internment, which we won't talk about here, but I think that it is difficult for us to say, well, what, they shouldn't have done this, but what would we have done? And we're kind of going through a similar crisis right now with the refugee population. So just food for thought, okay? You get global suffering that comes out of this on a very large scale, obviously a global scale, as many countries are fighting, and then the atomic bomb is dropped, and now you're trying to pick up the pieces, and where are you going to go from here? Global suffering, okay? Two global powers come out of World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union, okay? For more on the U.S. ditching isolation and jumping into the war, if you don't know about any of that, take my U.S. history course, U.S. History 112, and we talk extensively about this topic, isolation and really getting into the war. Hint, it's not all about Pearl Harbor. There's a lot of other factors going on behind the scenes, which you probably already know. But with these two global powers, they start to fight each other in what is now called the Cold War, and really this idea of containment, and the United States is trying to contain communism. Russia's trying to gain, or the Soviet Union is trying to gain as much land to become communist countries and help different leaders become those communist countries so they can become allies. Okay. Two things that I want you to know about this idea and about the Cold War. We look at it usually from a U.S. perspective. From a European standpoint, I really want you to think that the idea of third world countries or developing nations came out of this time period. And one of the things that we as historians look at today is that there's so much difference between what a developing country or what a third world country is, that really isn't something that we should be using. Not that it's offensive, but if we're looking at it, it's very Eurocentric. It's very European of us to look at a third world country, decide if they're a third world country or if they're undeveloped, because they're all developed in their own ways. I realize that will probably make me a snowflake. But what I do think is that with Russia or with the Soviet Union and the United States fighting together and trying to figure out where they're going from here and keeping each other at bay, is that they often run over some of these countries that had cultures that now we've missed. Okay, we pushed to the side. We didn't really realize that we were causing any problems as we did that, as either country was doing that. But that's really what comes of that. So what I'd end with is the idea of containment and this idea of pushing the United States continuing to push off communism and keep it really to the eastern lands in Europe, Russia, China, Vietnam. I mean, this is going to lead to the Vietnam War. The Korean War is something that comes out of this. But the Cold War is really a war of containment. And the idea that Europeans are pushing, not Europeans, but the Soviet Union is pushing back against that wall, trying to figure out what allies they can get with communist countries. Now, that's where I'm going to end today. I think that there are a lot of different things that we could talk about. You'll see some discussion posts this week, and hopefully you'll be able to figure out where you're going from there. But do the reading. If the war isn't your thing, skip those pieces and become more entrenched in some of the social aspects of World War II. And I hope that you have a great week. If you have any questions, please email me or stop by my office. And I hope things go well this week. We'll talk to you later. Bye.